The Queen's Gambit is one of Netflix's most popular originals of the last few years. It follows the story of Beth Harmon, a genius who defies the odds and societal expectations to rise to the top of the chess world. But while there's a lot to like about The Queen's Gambit, I can't help but also find myself severely underwhelmed every time I watch it. Behind the slick visuals and stellar performances, there's just something missing. Something core to the show that feels like it's being taken for granted. Passion. And I'd like to illustrate why I feel this way by comparing The Queen's Gambit to Haikyuu, a high school sports anime about volleyball. While that comparison might sound ridiculous, and while it's true that the shows are worlds apart in genre, tone, and message, there is a core theme that is universal to both shows. The relationship of our main character with the sport they both adore. And where Haikyuu gets this relationship spot on to craft what I'd say is one of the most compelling character-driven TV shows of recent memory, The Queen's Gambit, I feel, falls short. So amuse me a minute as I explain why The Queen's Gambit should have learned from sports anime. The anime Haikyuu follows the story of Hinata Shoyo, a middle school student who falls madly in love with volleyball and sets off on a journey of burning desire to become the best volleyball player he can be. And while they have very different backstories and inhabit very different worlds, Hinata and Beth Harmon share more than just hair color. They share a central message. I love this game, and you should too. This message is what I'd like to focus on, because where Haikyuu resoundingly succeeds and where The Queen's Gambit, in my opinion, fails is in this key area, showing us why our protagonist loves the game they play and why we, as proxy, should care about it too.
What do you say, Elizabeth? Do you want to play chess at the high school?
Yes, I'd like to.
For simplicity's sake, I would like to compare primarily the first episode of both series, since the pilot is pretty much the single most important episode a show will ever make, and is usually the episode where audiences are either hooked or turned off. Despite its severe disadvantage in running length, Haikyuu manages to give us a lot more of the answers we as a curious audience are looking for than The Queen's Gambit does. Right from its opening frame, Haikyuu begins to lay the founding blocks of both its character and its central theme.
目の前に立ちはだかる高い高い壁
Through a voiceover, we hear our main character's poetic refrain.
その向こうはどんな眺めだろうかどんな風に見えるのだろうか頂の景色俺一人では決して見ることのできない景色でも一人ではないのなら
Though this doesn't immediately make sense to us, this little declaration is actually incredibly important thematically. As we learn quickly in this episode and in this series, that wall is of course a wall of blockers on the court, preventing Hinata from scoring a point. And his inability to see beyond it is due to his own diminutive frame and of course the nature of volleyball, which is a team sport that requires coordination to create openings, which is why he needs people around him to see the view from that summit. The view of where he can score a point with his spike. Just from this brief analysis, perhaps two things are already striking. One, the romanticization of the sport of volleyball. I mean, you're just hitting a ball over a net, why all the fluff, one might ask. But this elevation of volleyball as being something greater than just a game, of almost being like a form of art or a beautiful landscape, is actually key to what makes Haikyuu such a fantastic show. It does not settle for cynical reality. It never allows its audience to ask, well, why does this dumb game matter? Because it can, and constantly does, make you believe that playing volleyball is a magical experience, as we will go on to see in a minute.
はい俺スパイク大好きで決まると気持ちいいし何よりかっこいいし
随分スパイクに思い入れがあるんだな
Second thing that perhaps strikes here is how even casually I seem to be explaining the various rules and nature of volleyball. You might think then that I have a running enjoyment or even an understanding of volleyball. I do not. Because this is the other beautiful thing about Haikyuu. Not only does it make you care, but it also makes you understand volleyball. the way our main character does. I had no interest in before, and honestly still have no interest in volleyball, and yet when you watch the show, you can't help but feel invested. It automatically pulls you into the sport and makes you not only understand the game, but appreciate it. This is the hidden magic ingredient that makes any sports film or TV show tick. And to understand why this is key, let's now compare it to the Queen's Gambit. The Queen's Gambit also chooses to open with a rather abstract first scene. We meet the adult Beth Harmon waking up in a hotel room, totally out of sorts, and rushing towards what we learn is a chess match with a well-dressed opponent. What is already different though... Wait. I just have to stop for a minute and comment on how bloody awful this shot is and how horrendous the framing is. Bear in mind this is our first introduction to the character, and look where the center of the frame is for the majority of this shot. Like, who thought this was okay? In a show that's supposed to be about female empowerment, we have a tits all in your face camera work going on, and... What's different about the Queen's Gambit's opening is that none of what we see will actually make sense by the end of the episode. For reference, the first episode ends here, with the drug-addled young Beth collapsing to the ground as she tries to steal more tranquilizers. So what we see in the opening few seconds is not, actually, in any way relevant to the first episode. We are no more equipped to understand it by the end than we are by the confusing start. This is just a little Hollywood trick, and a cheap one at that. It's an attempt to blind and dazzle and confuse you by showing you a lavish location, a glamorous protagonist, and a high-stakes situation, none of which we really understand. It's just meant to give you the promise that something good is coming in an attempt to hook you, because presumably the show itself seems to believe that what you will go on to see in the next 55 minutes is not interesting enough in of itself. And while this would be forgivable on its own, it's part of a dangerous theme that will reoccur during the rest of the pilot. The show's insistence on just telling us to do something, in this case stick around because good stuff is coming, rather than actually showing us and making us feel it for ourselves. Let's skip forward to a more important part, our protagonist's first encounter with the game they will come to love. In the Queen's Gambit, this comes 15 minutes into a 60-minute episode, and I don't think I really need to spell out why a show about a girl who likes chess probably shouldn't be this deep into its first episode before chess makes a meaningful appearance. But that aside, visually, let's look at how this scene is presented to us. A young Beth, currently living in an orphanage, is cleaning dusters in the basement when she spots the janitor Mr. Scheibel playing chess on his own. She sees some pieces being moved around and then is shooed away. Okay, certainly sufficient to pique our interest, and there's nothing actively bad about this scene. But now, let's compare it to the equivalent and much shorter scene in Haikyuu. Again, a younger version of our protagonist, in this case Hinata, is cycling past a television store when he happens to stop and watch a game of volleyball being played on TV. It's the high school volleyball nationals, and Hinata watches as one particular player stands out, rising high to spike a ball powerfully. As Hinata watches, he doesn't see the player as everyone else does. Instead, how high this player seems to jump, despite his short height, makes Hinata imagine that he has wings. It once more fits that theme we established in the opening, the idea that volleyball is somehow poetic and elevates anyone playing it to something greater than the sum of their parts. Of course, this player doesn't actually have wings, there's nothing supernatural about Haikyuu, but we see the picture as Hinata sees it, and that is really important. Again, let's compare these images side by side. Hinata's passion and his vision for the game is pretty much instantly clear and unmistakable. What Beth sees is rather mundane, the moving of a few pieces on a chessboard, and the expected curiosity of a girl who's watching something she's simply never seen before. There is, though, nothing remarkable about what she's watching. At least, we have no reason to believe so. Now, of course, this is not inherently wrong or bad, as I have to emphasize for the entirety of this video, The Queen's Gambit is a completely different show with a completely different tone and entirely separate genre conventions. It doesn't have to be exactly like Haikyuu or even remotely like it. What I'm saying instead is that there is a magic and a passion that Haikyuu displays that The Queen's Gambit instead chooses to mask with general confusion and mysteriousness. In this instance, The Queen's Gambit doesn't have to make seeing chess for the first time seem in any way magical or larger than life. We don't have to see, for example, Beth imagine the pieces as something greater than what they are, or view the board in any supernatural way. It's totally a fair argument to say, well, The Queen's Gambit is a live-action drama. It doesn't have to indulge in visual representations of imaginary feelings or thoughts. It's grounded in realism. That would be completely acceptable. Except a few moments later, we see Beth hallucinate about the chessboard on her ceiling. So the Queen's Gambit is willing to do such things, it just chooses not to at this first key juncture. Again, this scene is by no means bad. In fact, visually it looks really cool. It's nice that we do get to see that chess is possessing the mind of our protagonist, but it's undercut because we see Beth has just taken some pretty powerful drugs before seeing what she does see. I don't think I'm alone in saying that as a viewer, I just found myself thoroughly confused as to whether we were watching a girl fascinated by chess or a girl who's high as shit and getting addicted to drugs. Because as we will learn in the pilot, and as we saw with its ending, the first episode is as much about Beth's love for this tranquilizing drug as it is about chess itself. And these two things are heavily linked in the Queen's Gambit, with Beth often finding herself unable to play properly without taking the drug. To me, this just diminishes the message of this show and the relationship between our character and their loved game. Our main character should be addicted to chess or volleyball, not actual narcotics. It is of course a valid side arc to have our main character have demons to battle, but if Beth's visualizations, passion, and even ability to play chess are all linked to this drug, you can't help but ask as if you were, well, is it the drugs or is this how you really feel? To elaborate on why I have such a problem with the way these two arcs play against each other, I'd like to compare how Beth reacts to being denied both of these in turn. First, being denied chess, and secondly, being denied the drugs. In the case of chess, Beth is playing with Mr. Scheibels one day, and he takes her queen, her most important piece. Beth, eager to play on, makes her next move, only for Mr. Scheibels to insist that she must resign and cannot finish the game.
You have resigned the game.
You didn't tell me that in the rules.
It's not a rule.
Angered, Beth lashes out.
You cocksucker.
Get out.
This isn't really meant to be a funny scene, but I can't help but feel that Beth is less annoyed about losing the game and more at Mr. Scheibels just being a bit of a dickhead and creating impromptu rules that he doesn't take the time to explain, but we'll return to that later. After this insult, Mr. Scheibels begins to lock the door to the basement, denying Beth the opportunity to play chess anymore. Beth is frustrated and seems a bit saddened too, possibly because of guilt due to the way she acted as well. She tries on a different day to open it again, only to find it locked once more. Few days later, she tries again, and the basement door is open. Mr. Scheibels is back, waiting, and all is forgiven. They carry on as normal. Now let's compare this to the part of the episode where Beth is denied access to her drugs. Beth is told that the tranquilizers she's been getting are no longer going to be given to her, since the state laws have changed.
Where are the green ones?
You don't get them anymore.
There they are, right behind you.
I know where they are, Harmon, but I'm not gonna give you any. New state law. No more tranquilizers for kids. Go figure.
Not only is she visibly quite annoyed, but this lack of access starts to possess her. She stalks the medical room. She asks her friend if she has some spare to give, and she begins to become antsy and irritable without them.
Jolene,
Hey,
do you have any more vitamins?
don't be rude. This is Samantha. She just got here.
Haven't you got even just one?
How'd the exhibit go? You do okay?
Fine, but I need...
I don't want to hear about it.
These are, of course, withdrawal symptoms. And yes, it is totally natural that a young girl who's become addicted to tranquilizing drugs would crave them anxiously. But remember that this is not a true story. This is a plot device. This is a conscious decision by writers of the show to A, give Beth this addiction, and B, link it to her relationship with chess. They are both very deliberate decisions. So how does Beth finally deal with this denial? Well, she heads to the basement, grabs a screwdriver, and forces her way into the dispensary, defying all manner of rules and authority to get what she wants. This lengthy scene culminates with Beth gorging herself on these tranquilizers and collapsing onto the floor in front of the rest of the orphanage in a cliffhanger ending.
Elizabeth!
Mama?
Elizabeth!
Now, pretend you had no idea what the Queen's Gambit was, and I showed you these two scenes. What would you think is more important to our character? The chess or the drugs? Compared to how she handled losing the drugs, Beth took being denied chess like a champ. She meekly seeked it out a few times before just carrying on her day as normal, whereas her relentless desire for the tranquilizer drives her in a way that strong character goals usually do. She doesn't take no for an answer here, but she quite clearly does with chess. Again, remember that this wasn't an accident, this was a conscious decision by the writers. They chose to frame Beth's passions this way. There was a million other ways they could have structured Beth's relationship with chess, and this is what they thought would be best. So at this point, let's return once more to Haikyuu, because what it does is what I wish the Queen's Gambit did as well. We see that as he's growing up, Hinata is relentless and fiendish in his pursuit of volleyball, much like Beth is with her beloved tranquilizers. For Hinata, his passion is his addiction. He's in love with volleyball, purely and completely, and this is what drives his relentless desire to play it, practice it, and just exist in its world. When it comes to volleyball, he never takes no for an answer.
部員俺だけですか。
年々減ってね。あ、それと男子バレーは部活じゃなくて愛好会ね。
はあ。
どうする？他の部に変える？それか女子に混ざる？
それはちょっと一人でもやります。
そう？
小さな巨人になります。
ねえ、まだやんの？腕痛いし、ボールを持ったところに飛ばないし、もうやだよ。
お願い、もう一本だけ。1年生たちも入ってきてくれるし。
さっきももう一本だけって言ったよ。本当に最後だからね。
あざーっす。
行くよ。
He bothers anyone and everyone to help him learn and play. Even without a volleyball team, he practices in his free time, he practices on his own. He takes metaphorical and physical blows just to get a chance to hit a few more spikes of the volleyball.
危ねえ。翔よ、大丈夫か？悪い。
じゃあトスあげてよ。
When we see this as an audience, we can't help but admire. Damn, this guy really loves volleyball. You can't help but appreciate the lengths a character goes to get what they want. And as an audience, it makes us wonder, well, what's so special about volleyball then, that he likes playing it so much? And as always, Haikyuu resoundingly answers this question, from the little moments where we see Hinata's joy at being on the court, to the bigger questions that are asked and answered. We are left in no doubt about what volleyball means to Hinata.
オーライ。よし、またサービスエース。まだだ。
あれは無理だろう。
まだ落ちてない。まだ。
翔ちゃん。うわ、いったぞ。頑張るね。
怪我とかしちゃってもあれだし、正直勝てる相手じゃないし。
今のもう一本は。
なんでそこまで。
よくわかんないけど、でもまだ負けてないよ。
By framing volleyball this way, and by framing Hinata's need to play it almost as an addiction, we are given a very clear path to the next step, understanding why Hinata needs to win so badly. If playing volleyball means so much, if he sees it as a privilege, then it makes sense that he would do anything and everything to win and keep playing for longer and longer.
そいつを倒して、俺が一番長くコートに立ってやる。
As a viewer, this makes everyone's motivations in the show very clear, and it gives us a very simple reason to root for our main character to win, because we know how much it means to him. This leads me on to my next and final major point, understanding why our main character is special. I've spoken at length now why it's important to understand the motivations behind our character actions and to see what chess and volleyball mean to our respective protagonists, but understanding why we should care about this particular individual on screen is also very important. What is unique about our main character? Why them? This is a question every story must answer. Even if what is special is their distinct mediocrity, we need to understand as viewers why the person we're watching is somehow special in the world they inhabit. In Haikyuu, we have two clear reasons given to us. First, and most obvious, is our character's sheer unmatched love and determination for the sport itself, as we've just spoken about. How much Hinata cares about volleyball is reason enough to distinguish him from everyone around him who just can't seem to quite grasp his passion.
正直勝てる相手じゃないし。
今のもう一本は。
なんでそこまで。
Except of course for Kageyama, who consequently becomes his main obstacle, as the only person who actually shares and matches this drive.
そうだ、単純なことだ。どんな難しいボールだろうが、追う理由は一つ。
まだコートにボールは落ちていないから。
どんな劣勢だろうが、戦い続ける理由は一つ。
まだ負けていないから。
But towards the end of the episode, we see the extra factor that raises our interest in our main character even more. Down match point, playing for their lives in the tournament, Hinata's team gets a chance to set up a spike. One of his teammates looks ready to set him up, only for their amateurishness to override the situation and cause a fumbled toss. But, as if in a blur of movement, Hinata flies over, compensating for his teammate's weakness and showing incredible athleticism to reach and connect with the ball.
レフトにいたはずなのに、マークしてたはずなのに、なんでそこにいる?
It is of course anime convention to have someone explain this out loud in a very explicatory manner in a way that lacks any realism whatsoever. But the cheesiness here is part of the charm, even if we might label it overcompensation. Haikyuu leaves no doubt in the viewer's mind what we are seeing and what we're meant to get from it. It's made clear to us in this moment that Hinata is special in that despite his short height, he has incredible jumping ability and unreal speed and athleticism. Even the best player on the pitch, the one who seems to be dominating the game, can't help but be in awe of his ability. Of course, the brilliance of Haikyuu is that it undercuts this big superhero moment by the fact that Hinata hits the ball out. His one moment of glory, which he had dreamed about for the 3 years since we first saw him, is gone in a flash. That beautiful picture that he momentarily saw, the view from the summit he mentioned at the start, was fleeting and incomplete. But this is how characters are built. Seeing Hinata fail only makes us sympathize with him even more and root for him to grow and succeed. When he cries, we can understand why, and we consequently want to see him triumph and have his glory moment the next time. The reason all this is possible though is that we can see very clearly Hinata's physical prowess and of course how he wins or loses a particular point and thus the game. This is the final area I feel the Queen's Gambit severely lacks, because I feel pretty safe in saying that you can start watching the show with no knowledge of chess and finish the show pretty much none the wiser about how this game works. The Queen's Gambit makes little to no attempt to actually teach the viewer or even give them a basic understanding of how chess works, even as we watch our protagonist learn the rules for herself. Why is this needed, you might ask? This is a drama show after all, not an educational chess video. Well, yes, it's not necessary that we should know anything about chess as we watch the show, and I would guess that most people who've watched it are in this position. But returning to the question I posed earlier, how exactly are we supposed to know why our protagonist is winning or losing, or by proxy, why they're special, if we have no idea what's going on in the game we're watching? As I alluded to earlier, I went into Haikyuu with absolutely zero understanding of volleyball, and now I can quite easily tell you about the ins and outs of rotations, blocks, fakes, and jump floaters, without at any point it having felt heavy-handed.
西野谷君はすぐ交代するんですね。
はい、守備専門のリベロは何回でもコートを出入りできます。うちはミドルブロッカーの日向と月島が後衛に回り、サーブを打って1ラリー終わったところで西野谷と交代します。
Of course, volleyball has a natural advantage over chess here in that the basics are much easier to follow. Ball is hit, goes in or out of bounds, or hits net. But, like I said, there are some pretty complicated volleyball tactics that are explained to you over time gently. As Hinata learns, so do we. Consequently, we are able as an audience to appreciate it when our character is getting better and when they face tougher opponents, because we are equipped to see how someone is succeeding or failing. The Queen's Gambit makes a very clear and deliberate choice to not show the viewers anything about the intricacies of chess. This isn't speculation, this is pretty clear from the visual language of the film. Let's look at the first ever game that Beth plays. Notice the camera angle. Side on. It's not trying to give you a full picture of the board. If it was, we'd see it from the top down, as all chessboards traditionally tend to be viewed. Instead, we're getting the side angle because we're not really supposed to understand the moves being made. We're just supposed to take it for granted that a game is being played and that Beth is going to lose. Notice the final move, when Mr. Scheibel moves in for checkmate. We don't even see the board in its finished form. We just see Beth's reaction. Again, it's clear that we're not supposed to see and understand the checkmate for ourselves. We're just supposed to read faces here to understand that she has lost. In this case, we end up in a strange out-of-show metaphor.
Let's call it the scholar's mate.
As Beth seeks the answer for
How'd
why
you
she
do it?
lost,
Not today.
Show me.
Not today.
Mr. Scheibels decides to arbitrarily hold this information back, acting like a direct stand-in for the writers, who seem keen to do this for us, as we inherit the position Beth is occupying, confused and wondering why we're not being told what's going on. Later that night, we see Beth work through the answer in her hallucinations to figure out how to stop the scholar's mate. But this is exactly where my point proves itself. As a viewer watching these visualizations, how exactly are we supposed to understand what's going on if we don't understand chess? Even these are done in such an angle and speed that we don't really follow what she's doing. We're just supposed to take the show's word for it that she's figuring something out. Essentially, the show takes its viewers for fools, who wouldn't be able to comprehend chess tactics, even in this case, the most basic level, and instead decides to just keep them in the dark. I won't do this. Let me explain for a moment what happened here. The scholar's mate is a very specific chess strategy, used mostly to expose beginners who don't see it coming. It operates on a pincer move where the bishop provides cover for the queen to move in and checkmate the king in a mere 4 moves, a truly humiliating loss. As you can see here, the king cannot move away anywhere safe as he is blocked by the pieces around him. Nor is there any piece that could move to block the queen. The king can obviously not take the queen as the bishop is protecting her and denying that as a legal move. Thus, the scholar's mate is complete. I'd argue that understanding this is actually quite important, not just so that the viewer is equipped with chess knowledge to better understand this show, but also to serve as a reference point.
Let's call it the scholar's mate.
By seeing that Beth loses to this relatively simple strategy now, we see what her ability level is currently. Later, when she improves, we will have this reference point for how and why she's grown. Again, let me elaborate. Let's look at the first time Beth beats Mr. Scheibel in a game. How she does it is actually really clever, and the show does a massive disservice to itself by not letting us really see it. First, Beth pushes her pawn towards Mr. Scheibel's knight. This obviously forces Mr. Scheibel to move it back, since trading a pawn for a knight is clearly not good. As he moves it back, she pushes her pawn forwards again, delivering a check to the king via her bishop. Mr. Scheibel is now in a bad spot. He could just move the king away, but then Beth's pawn would be free to kill his knight. So, thinking he's outsmarted her, he puts the knight back where it was, now that the pawn can no longer challenge that position. But Beth takes that knight with her bishop. This once again delivers a check to the king. Mr. Scheibels is forced to make the best move he can and takes the bishop with his covering pawn. So far, a 1-to-1 trade, but this was all part of Beth's plan, and now she's able to make her killing move. She pushes her pawn forwards one more time, putting Mr. Scheibels in a lose-lose situation. Currently, her pawn is threatening to take Mr. Scheibels' knight. If he moves the knight away, he can save it, but that would allow Beth to move her pawn to the opposite end of the board, which, for those unaware, allows her to convert the pawn into any piece she wants. In this case, she would obviously choose the queen, the most powerful piece, and that would be a huge swing in a game where neither player currently has a queen of their own. As is often the case with chess, Mr. Scheibel hasn't explicitly lost. He's just in such an unfavorable position that there's no point in playing on. When two opponents respect each other's ability enough, they know that if they ever fall into a significant disadvantage, that the other player will be good enough to see the game through to its logical and slow end. So the sporting and the time-saving thing to do is to simply concede, and Mr. Scheibel does that. This, of course, was also the message he was trying to teach Beth earlier.
You have resigned the game.
You didn't tell me that in the rules.
It's not a rule. It's sportsmanship.
But none of that is ever explained in the show. I know this because unlike volleyball, I do have a history with chess, having myself played it since I was a kid. But again, for a viewer that doesn't have that history, none of this would make any sense, and thus actual meaning and emotion is lost from the show. We don't understand why Beth is brilliant or see how she grew and learned from her first encounter. Nor do we understand why Mr. Scheibels was so insistent on Beth conceding earlier, because neither he nor anyone in the show has actually explained to Beth or the audience the rules or etiquette of chess. It might seem very cool and mysterious to just do things without explanation in a show, and the Queen's Gambit resorts to this often, But the trap that this creates is that it actually makes the show lose meaning. If we as an audience cannot appreciate why someone won or lost, then it makes each of those wins and losses that much more hollow. We just have to take everyone's word for it when they say Beth is brilliant, because we have no way of gauging for ourselves.
To tell you the truth of it, child, you're astounding.
As she starts to dominate others later on in the episode, we don't even get a picture for what kind of player Beth is. Is she aggressive or defensive? Is she innovative or textbook perfect? Is she responsive or is she calculating? We just have to take everyone's word for it that she won because she's good. Later, for example, when Beth relays to Mr. Scheibels how she beat the entire chess club of the local school simultaneously, she starts dropping some terms we've never heard.
What surprised me was how bad they played. They left backward pawns all over the place, and the pieces were wide open for forks.
What exactly are backwards pawns? Or for that matter, what is a fork in this context? Do we know? No. But again, the show doesn't want us to. All we're supposed to hear is just some generic chess terms. It reminds me of the Big Bang Theory school of writing, where the joke isn't that something funny was said, the joke is that a big nerdy word was used, and that means the nerds were being nerds.
So it's settled. The fate of Doctor Who's TARDIS will be decided by a Game of Thrones-inspired deathmatch on the battlefield of Thundercats versus Transformers.
If you still have that bra, I'll give you a nickel for it.
Our understanding is only at a surface level, not anything deeper. We're not supposed to know the meaning behind the chess terms that Beth uses, we're just supposed to understand that she did some fancy chess stuff and beat them all, and that's all that matters. But for me, it just cheapens the show and dampens my excitement for it, which is kind of the theme of how I felt. At every occasion, I was not really shown why I should care about chess, why Beth loves it, what it means to her, or even what the hell was going on when she's playing. The writer simply told me, take my word for it, over and over. Take my word for it that chess is cool. Take my word for it that Beth is really good. Take my word for it that she did something really clever to win the game. To me, that's not a good show. That's a lazy show. Which is why I wish the Queen's Gambit was more like Haikyuu. Because when Hinata plays volleyball, we know exactly what it means to him. When he practices like a man possessed, we understand why he's doing it. When he grows, when he learns, we can see how he's done so. When he's against a strong opponent, we understand why that opponent is strong. And even when he's up against the odds and he's very unlikely to win, we still feel invested in every point he scores. When he finally loses, we understand his pain and we share in his desire to return and win the next time. So even with its big budget, slick aesthetic, and massive hype, the Queen's Gambit misses something fundamental that a bunch of pencil-drawn high school volleyballers understand: passion, and its role in storytelling. So even if it's a completely different show, with a completely different genre, it's pretty clear to me that if it wanted to be better, if it wanted to be amazing, the Queen's Gambit should definitely have learned from sports anime. Thank you for watching this video. Video essays like this take a long time to make, so if you enjoyed it, then please do consider supporting me on Patreon, which is a big help and gives me the security to keep making content like this. Speaking of, I'd like to give a special mention to the first two patrons of this channel, April Lanzette and Luke the Spook. I can't tell you how much I appreciate those of you who do support me, whether that be financially or just by liking and sharing this content. So thank you very much, guys, and in that spirit, please do continue to do so and share this if you like it, and also consider turning on the subscriber notifications so that you don't miss any future videos. If you have any suggestions for what I should explore next, then drop it in the comments below and I will do my best to get to it. But for now, I'll say goodbye here, and I hope to see you all for another video really soon. Thank you for watching.